Welcome to Monologues by Hassie, where I'm going to be dropping unsolicited brain dumps from the depths of my grey matter. I'll talk about life, money, society, and self-development, plus whatever else lies up there, whilst hopefully not getting cancelled in the process. 2 Sundays ago, I was in Okinawa, Japan. So it's a set of islands that are in the very, very deep south. It's very tropical, palm trees, absolutely beautiful. And I was enjoying an amazing sunset in a place called the American Village, eating a meal. Little did I know that that meal would give me food poisoning, and that would completely disrupt the next week that I had planned. So I'm down to basically what is my last full week in Japan. I was flying all the way from the deep south in Okinawa up north to Sapporo. So I had 2 flights to get me there, and there were all these things that I wanted to do in Sapporo. It was being my last week. There was a lower emphasis on getting work done, on getting projects done, but nonetheless, there were work tasks that I wanted to achieve with regards to a couple of the projects that I have on my plate. And on top of that, there were all the things that I wanted to do in Sapporo. Enjoy the parks, practice running, which is something I've been doing as I've been traveling around the world because I have a race, the City to Surf, coming up next week in Sydney. And there were so many of these things that I wanted to do with regards to the skills I'm developing professionally, personally, and simply being present and being able to enjoy being in a new Japanese city. I'd also been practicing my Japanese, and whilst not very good, I was really excited to spend some time in some local izakayas, which are the local bars, and try to talk to some locals and really just have very good interactions for that 5-day stay in Sapporo. But little did I know that that week was going to be me being sick, dealing with food poisoning, and I would only really start to recover towards the end, on the very last day or so. And so it was a period where I had an expectation of what that final week in Japan was going to be like, or the final full week in Japan was going to be like, and it went completely out the window. And I was initially very, very unhappy about this. But one of the things that I've learned, and if I've learned anything over the last few months, is that every expectation I've almost had to let go of. And when you get sick, that kind of goes to a whole other level, because now you need to let Mother Nature take its course. And for me, I wasn't taking antibiotics. I didn't see a doctor. I simply let my food poisoning deal with itself over time, and it did. But unfortunately, or fortunately, it took 7 days. So it disrupted my plans. But the real thing that I had to take out of that is I had to let go of that expectation that you were going to complete this work for this project. You were going to go to these sites and do and explore these things. And Sapporo happened to be one of the more expensive places in Japan that I was staying in terms of accommodation, in terms of actually getting to Sapporo, being given that I had to fly there from the deep south in Okinawa. So there was a considerable expense that I'd already invested into being in Sapporo, and I had to throw everything out the window. And this is just something that I had to learn to accept. It is the way it is. And what I've noticed, and one thing I've become better at doing as time goes on, as I get older and as I develop, is when I have these expectations, and I don't think it's bad to have an expectation, but when they do go astray, I still encounter what I would describe as mental anguish. And sometimes it results in me not having a good night of sleep, or me having some sort of negative rumination for a set period of time. But I've become much better at letting it go. And what I realized for that week is I'm in a very fortunate place in that for maybe one of the first times in my life, I've actually created the opportunity where I'm sick and I can actually give my body a chance to be sick. And what I mean by this is there have been many times in my life during high school, during university, during work, where I remember the last time I had food poisoning in my life, I actually got called into a work meeting the next day. And despite being on sick leave and feeling absolutely horrible, I was called in for some sort of pressing project. And I was feeling absolutely horrible, sweating, but I jumped on a Zoom call just so I could help my team out. And I know there are other people in the world who have children. And when they get sick, you can't decide you're not going to feed your kids. you still need to go prepare food for them. So there are other people in the world who have all these obligations, and when they're sick, they very rarely have the chance to truly allow their bodies to be sick. So even though I had an expectation of what my ideal week should have been like in terms of work, in terms of leisure, in terms of travel, in terms of enjoying that last week in Japan, I really just had to let it go and give in to what the actual circumstances were. And I just had to accept that you're sick, but I'm grateful that I actually have the time and space to be sick. And maybe this is a very expensive way to be sick, and it's definitely not ideal, but this is how it is. And once I let go of that expectation, the mental anguish let go. I just accepted it is what it is. You're not going to feel productive. You're not going to feel like doing anything, but that's okay. Just do something small. And for me, the small thing was, it took me all of my energy on a particular day to muster myself, despite having food poisoning, to get in a state to maybe go to the convenience store and muster up the energy to go buy that rice ball and buy that soup so you can bring it back and eat it. And I just incrementally increased those things, what I was doing each day. Now, there were days where, I did have to take a flight to get up to Sapporo with food poisoning. Not a lot of fun. But I made it. I simply had to accept it for what it was, that I was going to be in discomfort for a week. And the beauty of being sick, one of the things I'm always grateful for when you get these acute sicknesses that you recover from in a short period of time, is that it does put your priorities in alignment. And you realize that when I was healthy, like the person who I was before I got food poisoning, I had 20 things that I wanted to do that week. But as soon as I got sick, the only thing I really cared about was getting better. And so that's always a side note, a bit of a detraction from what I'm trying to get to in this episode, in that we should be letting go of expectations. But when you do get sick, you kind of realize your only priority is getting better. And then even more recently, I submitted one of my applications to Google Play Store for production access. And I was expecting, in my head, this is going to get approved. And I remember being so happy. I put this application in and I thought, wait, this is great. This is going to go public very soon and I'm going to feel absolutely fantastic. And I had a fantastic day that day. I was in Tokyo. It was my last 2 days in Japan and I had just done a 12-kilometer run. And so considering that I had food poisoning the previous week in Sapporo, I'm like, great. I got a 12-kilometer run in this week. So just a few days ago in Tokyo, I felt absolutely fantastic. And then I saw a rejection email at about 1:30 p.m. at night. 1:30 a.m. in the morning. So 1:30 at night. And I felt absolutely awful. And that morning I woke up and again, I was ruminating. Why? Because I had this expectation that this process was going to be very smooth, that I was not going to have any roadblocks along the way. And inherently, I actually know this is not true, because everything I've been doing for the last few months, nothing has gone to plan. But that also hasn't been a bad thing, and it doesn't mean I shouldn't have plans, but nothing has gone to plan. And so I inherently knew that something like this shouldn't happen, but nonetheless, I had the expectation that this piece of work that I did was going to get approved by Google and it was going to move to the next phase, only to find myself that I'd been knocked back and I was going to have to wait another 2 weeks for this to happen. And once again, just like when I got food poisoning and I had to deal with the fact that I wasn't going to be able to enjoy Sapporo in the way that I expected to enjoy Sapporo, I was also found myself disappointed about the outcome of my rejection by Google from their Play Store. And again, I ruminated for a few hours, but as I said, I've become better at this. And something switched and I realized, okay, you need to go through another round, another 2 weeks until you can apply for access again. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to mope? And I remember in Tokyo, before I went out and did my last minute souvenir shopping, I said I sat at a cafe and I started doing bits of work that I needed to do to make sure that I didn't have that outcome again. And I let go of that disappointment. I let go of that expectation that things weren't going to happen. And I know this is going to happen again and again and again for all of the endeavors that I have coming up, because they're not going to be easier. And something tells me that life is just going to throw more challenges my way. And it is my job that when my expectations are not met, rather than moping in my own misery and ruminating and getting stuck, is to simply figure out what can I do in this situation? And when I did have that flip regarding my app being rejected, I went from somebody who was unhappy and not really in the present moment. And remember, this is now my last 2 days in Japan and I'm there and I'm not really alive. I'm not really present because I'm focused on the fact that Google said, no, you cannot put your application in our Play Store yet. You need to go back and make a few changes and come back to the table. And like I said, I wasn't present in the moment. I wasn't present in the fact that I'm at the end of this incredible trip where all these positive things have happened. Yes, things haven't gone to plan, but I've created an incredible experience in the last 6 to 7 months since I left my job and decided to travel the world. And here I am ruminating over one small negative thing, which clearly isn't the end of the world. It just means I need to wait another 2 weeks. My expectation was broken. And as soon as I let go of that, all of a sudden I became present. I was able to enjoy being in Japan once again. And the whole point of this episode is that we have expectations, and those expectations are going to be broken all the time. And this is simply an inherent nature. It would be wonderful. Actually, no, it wouldn't be wonderful if everything in my life went the way that I wanted it to, because then where's the story? Great stories are made because the characters have an expectation that something's going to go some way and it doesn't, but nonetheless they figure out how to overcome those hurdles. So to those of you listening to this today, I want you to positively ruminate on where you have let your expectations get the worst of you, and then stop ruminating. Let go of those expectations, embrace the situation as it currently is, and figure out what steps you can take to make that situation better. So I'm going to leave this episode there. I'm going to end it there. And just to be very clear, it's my standard expectation that I release a podcast every week, typically on a Sunday. And because I was sick for a whole week in Sapporo, and because I had to go to Tokyo and I had all these other things on my plate, I am many days late for releasing this episode. And you know what? That is okay. It is not something I do all the time, but due to the circumstances, this is what it is. I'm looking forward to getting back to regular programming, but in the last 2 weeks, things have been a bit hectic and I haven't been able to. So to those of you listening to this episode, I wish you great success on all your endeavors. You've just made it through another episode of Monologues by Hassie. It brings me great pleasure to know that you made it to the end. To listen to more episodes, subscribe on your favorite podcast app or visit monologuesbyhassie.com. Thanks for swinging by.